Could Brandon Nimmo make the first All-Star appearance of his career this season? I'm going to explain why the Mets need that level of production from him on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter, @FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment matter more by visiting FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Now this offseason, the big hole the Mets were supposed to fill in their offense was going to be left by Brandon Nimmo departing in free agency. We were not sure if the Mets were going to commit the dollars to bring Nimmo back, but they ultimately decided that the best way to address their lineup was to keep their lineup the same by signing Nimmo to that 8-year, $162 million deal. Now, with that said, there is still a notion from the fan base, and I'm sure even to a certain extent from a front office, that it was still trying to make other moves after Nimmo, that wants to see some improvement with this lineup. And now, because you're basically returning the same team, except you sub Omar Narvaez for James McCann, you go out and you get Tommy Pham to replace a role that I guess maybe a Tyler Naquin was serving in some respects by the end of this season, that fourth outfielder role, trying to get some pop in your lineup by bringing him aboard. You're really in a position where the prospects that could come up are the real way to get better, or you're just hoping that you get that same level of production you got across the board. And when I look at the Mets lineup, I think there's some players where, for the most part, you sort of know what you're going to get, right? You know what you're going to get from Pete Alonso. You have a pretty good idea what you're going to get from Starling Marte, in the sense that, 120, 130 games maybe, and he's going to hit for a high average, and because he hits for a high average, the on-base percentage will be good enough. He's going to steal some bags and score some runs, have some pop, but not too much. You basically know what you're getting there. Jeff McNeil and Francisco Lindor up the middle. How much better can they be than they were last year? You hope that Jeff McNeil goes out and wins another batting title, but that's still a tall task. And with Lindor, I think if you got the exact same season, you sign it up for it right now, you say, okay, he's going to go out there, he's going to drive in 100, hit the same amount of home runs. Obviously, you like him to be a little bit more in the power department, just because there's not a lot of guys that you can expect to hit for power on this team, but I really don't see a chance that he is much better than he was. I think if he is where he was, you're thrilled. He was almost a 7-win player. So I just don't know how much more room for growth is there. When I look at the everyday players, Brandon Nimmo is one that I actually think another level is attainable. He just had the best season of his career, bar none. And you look at some of the counting stats, and they pop out to you. 102 runs scored, first time in his career over 100. Able to stay on the field for 151 games. That's what you needed, right? You needed him to prove health, and you hope that's not a question mark moving forward. 2021, he misses 70 games. 2019, he missed nearly 100 games. He played in 69. 2018, he played 140, and then you have those early seasons before that, his rookie year, second year, all that stuff. 2020, he was healthy, but 60-game season. I really think the more that I not only look at the injuries that he's had in his career, but also what we saw last season and the type of athlete it is, I think Nimmo has proven that he can stay on the field. Now, he has to do it again. But I think after going through that full season again, that was a big learning curve for him. And I think this year, with that kind of memory for him, with that in his files of his brain about how to do it, how to navigate it, how to table set a team every day and start in center field and be available, I think there is some room for improvement. And there's a couple of things that jump out to me when I look at his profile from last season that makes me think there's a little bit more. For one, all of his contact percentages were up. The contact percentage he made on swings outside of the zone, inside of the zone, just his contact percentage in general. He was connecting with the baseball more last year than ever before, and his barrel percentage was up. But you also look at where he was hitting the baseball. I actually just saw somebody tweet, and I apologize, it just came across my brain as I was going through this, but I saw a tweet about how Brandon Nimmo was maybe second or third most as far as hits on the ground last year. I think you had Ahmed Rosario was up there. I'm drawing a blank on who the other one was. It might have been a Met as well. And then you had Nimmo in the mix. He hit the ball on the ground more last year than ever before, over 50% of the time. Now, if he can get the ball in the air a little bit more with that improved contact, if he can improve the quality of his contact a little bit, could we see a just slight uptick in power? What would that mean for him? Brandon Nimmo hit 16 home runs last season. 2018, he had 17 home runs the other year where he played a full season. Can he get over 20 homers this year? If you look at Jeff McNeil, we're going to expect more pop from McNeil. No, I think he's gotten back to the type of hitter he's supposed to be, spraying the ball all over the place. That's what he should do. If he gets an inside fastball that he ambushes early in the count and turns on it, yes, McNeil can leave the yard, but that's not what you expect from him. Is Starling Marte really going to hit home runs? More home runs, at least. Not necessarily likely. I mean, if he's available more, sure, but I don't know how much more pop he's going to tap into. I think Brandon Nimmo has some sneaky pop that could still be developed here a little bit, and the type of worker he is, signing that contract, I just believe that there's a chance we see Nimmo leave the yard 22, 23 times. I tweeted a couple days ago, I thought he had 25 home run pop this season. Now, part of that was because he showed up to camp looking great, which, of course, Nimmo's always had a great body. He's a great athlete. We know that. But after a clean bill of health for a full season, having a healthy offseason, nothing to rehab from, no injury to worry about, to be on his grind all offseason with the motivation of a contract, I just think we might see what could be the best version of Brandon Nimmo entering, his age 30 season. He'll turn 30 in March this year, at the end of March. If Brandon Nimmo can get a little bit better here, show out, for one, we could see the first All-Star appearance of his career, which I want to dive into in a second here, and we could see him be the best center fielder in the National League, and the Mets really need that based on what else they did this offseason. So I want to dive into that element of this a little bit more in just a minute. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. This year, the only app you need at your Super Bowl party is FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. We are thrilled that FanDuel has become our new sports betting partner because, as I just mentioned, they're #1 in America. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. Download FanDuel.com now so you can bet on Super Bowl 57 with a no-sweat first bet where you'll get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to the point spread to who will score a touchdown. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Best of all, you can get paid your winnings instantly. So join FanDuel.com today at FanDuel.com/LockedOn to claim your no-sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Make every moment matter more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Despite signing a $162 million contract, Brandon Nimmo still has yet to receive any hardware across the board. No gold gloves, no silver sluggers, no all-stars. I think this is Nimmo's year in that regard. I believe that the Mets need Nimmo to be that guy that gets that recognition and plays up to that level, particularly in the first half, getting them off to a fast start. You need to wait a little bit to see a Brett Beatty or a Francisco Alvarez, really come into their own as everyday players potentially at the big league level. The Mets might add at the trade deadline. They're looking for that little something more. I just think that the motivation level for Brandon Nimmo with that money in the bank and with that commitment the organization just made it to him. I think you could see him really just hit the ground running, and the Mets need him to be that guy, to be that table setter. Sometimes after you go out, you win 101 games, you get to the beginning of a new season, and it might be a little bit harder to get going. I think Nimmo is the table setter, the tone setter, the guy that can really spark this offense. And if he is leading off games with home runs, he's getting on base, if we're seeing him swipe some more bags, something he did a little bit of near the end of next season, or the end of last season, excuse me. I just believe that is going to take them to the next level. And because he really became kind of the only major addition, it was kind of addition by not having to subtract him, that onus is on him even greater than it ever has been before. You thought that the Mets were going to have Carlos Correa to be that new attraction. The only big attraction, money spent on this team offensively, was Nimmo. They could have gone another direction. They could have tried to get another center fielder. They put their pocketbook, Steve Cohen did, behind this decision. The Mets as a franchise showed they believe in him, and this is his time. So I think Brandon Nimmo has a responsibility, not to be an all-star, but to be at least the guy he was last season and try to stretch beyond that. And, I said, could he be the best center fielder in the National League? The funny thing is, he just was that. You look at F-WAR, he led all National League center fielders last season. Now, the American League, I failed to mention on yesterday's show that Mike Trout actually was ahead of him. Trout did not play enough games to qualify for the F-WAR leaderboard, so I did not notice him. But in the limited games that he played, he still was a 6-win player. Unbelievable. And then you had Aaron Judge playing center field last year. You also look at Julio Rodriguez, someone that I think a lot of people are looking towards to be that next best center fielder in baseball. He's in the American League. Byron Buxton, if he's ever healthy, he could be the best center fielder in baseball. Change your focus to the National League. Where are there great center fielders? Is Brian Reynolds going to get back to that in hopes to play himself off of the Pirates roster at the trade deadline? Potentially. Can Cody Bellinger in Chicago rediscover what he once was? I don't necessarily believe he can get back to being that, but I guess he's a guy that has the ceiling to be the best center fielder in the National League. Are you going to have a young player like a Corbin Carroll establish himself in Arizona and be that guy? I don't even necessarily know who's playing center field for the Dodgers this year. Is it Trace Thompson? Don't think he's going to be the answer there. So you sort of start to canvas the National League, and there's not a lot of top-tier center fielders. And if you focus in on the National League East, you have Brandon Nimmo. You got the new Jazz Chisholm in Miami, set to play center field for the first time. That will be an interesting experience, and offensively, he could be that guy. He's that dude on the cover of MLB The Show, but I don't know what he's going to look like defensively. But then you got Michael Harris. Michael Harris is a talent that is pretty tantalizing to watch. The defense is unbelievable. The bat was way further along than we ever could have expected as he made the jump straight from Double-A last year. I know personally we were going through our top 10 center field rankings, and at times, and this is over at Just Baseball, we're ranking the top 10s at each position. They'll be released in the coming weeks here. When I first ranked center fielders, I ended up putting Harris above Nimmo because I still believe that the defense with Harris, a little bit better. He's younger, and maybe there's also that part of me that was trying to check my Mets bias as I'm writing for a national audience. At the same time, I don't think that the gulf between the two is a gulf at all. I think they're very comparable players with the impact that they'll bring, and Nimmo is so much further along. Harris is going to be entering year 2 where maybe the league figures him out a little bit offensively. He's going to have to make his adjustments. Brandon Nimmo is a sage veteran at this point that has been there, done that has the experience to really go out and perform at a top tier, and the defense has gotten to a place where you trust him to be an above average defensive center fielder. I don't know if he'll ever win a Gold Glove, but really good out there. I think if Brandon Nimmo goes out, taps into a little bit more power, maybe steals some bases, scores over 100 again, plays in 150 games, he is going to end up leading the league in F4 again, and he will be the best center fielder in the National League. that should warrant an all-star appearance. And you know what? It could finally warrant some other hardware. Maybe a silver slugger could head his way as well. Again, I just think this is the season for Nimmo to go out and show out. And I'm excited to see what he's going to do. And he's already in spring training. He already seems to be maybe doing a little bit of mentoring for the younger players. I want to touch on that next because I think Brandon Nimmo could be that next captain of the Mets. And this is his year to prove that as well. So we'll get to that in just a minute. First, though, another word from our sponsors. Who was the first position player the Mets had at camp? Well, I don't know. I wasn't there. But who was the first video that was circulating? It was Nimmo taking some BP. He had one of those big exercise balls in between his leg, working on getting his hips through his swing. A little more pop maybe with those type of drills. Potentially. Brandon Nimmo, when he signed that 8-year contract, I made the remark that could we see number 9 hang in the rafters one day? Something that we never would have anticipated when Nimmo was the other outfield prospect to Michael Conforto, who debuted first, when Nimmo was a 4th outfielder to some as he made his way to the big leagues. That was his ceiling. Now, starting center fielder of the New York Mets with a 8-year contract under his belt. I think that Nimmo is now starting to write his Mets legacy. And in a weird way, I feel like it goes back to that catch he made robbing the home run against the Dodgers last year, the emotion he showed towards the fans after. He wants to be a big part of winning baseball in New York City for this franchise that took a shot on him when he was a prospect coming out of high school that couldn't even play on a high school baseball team because he grew up in Wyoming and he had to make a name for himself in Legion Ball. He makes it through the Mets farm system, got knocked all along the way, always hyper criticized, didn't listen to the noise, continued to work, makes it to the big leagues, has some success, deals with the injuries, and then last year gets to sort of live out that childhood dream and the dream that he had when he was drafted, where he was playing on a contender in big moments in September, making big plays. Now you go into another year of that with that commitment from the franchise and with a chance to go down as one of the best players this franchise has ever seen. I mean, if he has just decent numbers for the next 4 or 5 years, he's a Mets Hall of Famer. If he's going to ascend to that level of having the number 9 retired, the Mets need to win some World Series. He needs to get some hardware under his belt. A lot has to happen, but Nimmo still now has that leeway to do so. And I think part of it also is going to come to what he does as a teammate. He pulled out of the World Baseball Classic. He's going to be there in camp all year. There's young players who are going up to him like Brett Beatty and Mark Vientos that he's saying what's up to that are now in the cages with Brandon Nimmo in Port St. Lucie, getting their work in early, and he has set an example of what it means to be a big leaguer if he can take on that mentorship role of those young guys like a Beatty, who's going to be so critical to the Mets' success this year, and if he gets the most out of Beatty by setting the tone on the field, similar to what the Mets' last captain did in David Wright, you're just going to get such a better result across the board from this team. There's a lot of guys that can be the next captain of the Mets if you really want to get down to it. You can look at the veterans on this team that have been here when it comes to the big leagues forever, like a Max Scherzer or Justin Verlander, who are going to be very vocal, I would imagine, in that clubhouse. You have a Pete Alonso, who is the best homegrown talent that I think this franchise has produced. As great as Jeff McNeil is, as great as Brandon Nimmo is, the ability to lead the league in home runs and RBIs, that just takes you to a different stratosphere. And also Pete Alonso is kind of box office as a star player with the way that he drives the baseball. And even you see him on commercials, you see him out there. He's such a great dude. He also falls into that kind of captain class where people have mentioned his name. You also have the shortstop, the guy that's going to be on this team longer than anyone else, the guy with the biggest contract, Francisco Lindor, playing the position that is always the captain of the infield, the captain of your defense. There's a lot of guys that have to be in leadership roles, and I think all of them will be. But Brandon Nimmo, based on being a homegrown guy, based on the contract he has, the position he plays, the work ethic he displays, I could see him getting that type of recognition of being the Mets captain. And it's time this year to assume that level of responsibility beyond his own game to help the team win and help other guys get better along the way. So I'm so excited the Mets brought him back. I didn't necessarily anticipate it coming into this offseason. I thought he sort of played himself off the Mets where he was going to get too long of a contract that the Mets would be comfortable giving him. They've been focused so much on a short window when it comes to signing guys, and I really didn't know if they were going to sign anyone that's not considered a superstar to that level of a long-term deal. And I think this was their sort of acknowledgement that they view him maybe not as a superstar, but a potential all-star player. And that is what I believe he will be for the Mets in 2023. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Prospects, hosted by Lindsey Crosby. Locked On MLB Prospects is where you want to go to learn about the stars of tomorrow. Follow Locked On MLB Prospects on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts.